A study came out in the preeminent journal of science a few years ago that I think really highlights the challenge that we face. It goes like this. In 11 studies, we found that participants typically did not enjoy spending 6 to 15 minutes in a room by themselves with nothing to do but think. That they enjoyed doing mundane external activities much more, and that many preferred to administer electric shocks to themselves instead of being left alone with their thoughts. Most people seem to prefer to be doing something rather than nothing, even if that something is negative. An environment that takes all outside sources of stimulation and brings it down to an absolute minimum. Where there's nothing to see or hear, nothing to smell or taste, no sense of touch or temperature, no movement or speech. And let's not forget, the brain does not exist in a vacuum. The tail of the brain, the spinal cord, is constantly fighting the forces of gravity. And in this environment, even gravity was reduced. An 8-foot pool with a foot of water, and in that water is 2,000 pounds of Epsom salt. It's a mattress of water. You don't have to move a single muscle to stay afloat. Now, the room built around the pool is soundproof, it's lightproof, it's temperature and humidity controlled. The patients have complete control over the float experience. They could get in and out of the pool whenever they want. They could have the lights on and off whenever they want. And we said, what would happen after a single 1-hour float session? And I'm going to show you the raw data exactly as it was presented to me a few years ago for all 50 patients. In red is their pre-float anxiety level, and in blue is their post-float anxiety. Every single patient showed a reduction in anxiety. In fact, the people who went into the experience with the most anxiety showed the largest effect. Overall, the group showed a 14-point drop on the Spielberger State Anxiety Inventory, a highly significant effect. The post-float anxiety levels of the patients were reaching normative levels. And take a look, what is reducing even more than anxiety? Muscle tension. Think about it. All of that tension that we're harboring in our body, in our back, how much of that is driving our anxiety and stress? And floating is one of the few treatments I've seen that directly addresses this issue. But it's not just reducing symptoms of mental illness, it's enhancing mental wellness. And it wasn't just during the float itself. Serenity lasted for an entire day. This group of people who was absolutely miserable coming into their float were left with a feeling of peace and serenity that lasted an entire day. Now, I should mention, this is just the short-term effects of a single float session. To study the long-term effects of multiple float sessions. And one of the biggest changes we're seeing is in blood pressure. Within the first 5 to 10 minutes of a float, you see a precipitous drop in blood pressure on the order of 10 to 15 points. And it stays that way for the remainder of the float session. And interestingly, the degree to which your blood pressure drops during the float is related to the degree to which floating induces that feeling of serenity. That floating is leaving your nervous system in a state where the world feels more rewarding after the float. But how? How is this happening? Is there anything else coming into the brain when everything is being reduced? Well, it turns out there is. There's a rich signal coming from the internal world of the body, a concept known as interoception. This is the signal that's amplified during a float. The patients were reporting the spontaneous induction of meditative states, where suddenly all of their conscious awareness was focused on things like the breath, the heartbeat. They were able to disconnect from the outside world and suddenly reconnect to themselves. So as this new era moves into the second decade, and our nervous systems are going to be inundated by ever more stimulation, I think floating could provide an antidote. And in fact, this is something you could try yourself, because float centers are popping up all over the country. You see, the modern day nervous system craves disconnection. We just don't know it because we're so addicted to being connected that we become perpetually stuck in this loop. It's amazing, actually. Our brain and our mental health is a byproduct of the environment in which we exist.